Welcome to the CCFR Radio Podcast, your source for news, updates, and stories from the CCFR.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 180 of the CCFR Radio Podcast. I'm your host, Giltaca. Thanks for joining me again today on the show. It is absolute clown town because Canada is just clown town. So hopefully you got some rest over the holidays because it is going to be an exciting year. I don't think this is going to let up anytime soon. We got a ton of stuff to cover. Today's episode is going to be a little bit longer than usual. Of course, the biggest news is Justin Trudeau is resigning, or sort of resigning, right? If you listen to his statement carefully. And of course, on the way out the door, I guess he needed another 2.5 months, both for the Liberal Party to get their act together. We're all just sitting here and waiting. Couldn't be at a worse time, as I mentioned. But also so he can kind of prance around as Prime Minister for another few months. So Parliament is shut down for the next 2.5 months. New state-of-the-art range has been approved in Ajax, Ontario, and is being built. It's going to take about a year, but there's going to be nothing like it in the country. Tracy Wilson was there. She's going to talk to us about it. And of course, among a million other things that we're going to talk about today, we also have an interview with Scott Carpenter from International Shooting Supplies, who's also the current president of the CCFR. We want to talk about something fairly important with him, and you'll get to see that interview happen in our new studio. So anyway, all that and more, CCFR Radio Podcast starts right now. 𝐂𝐿𝐿 has been a provider of trauma care training to military and police in Canada for nearly 2 decades. Now this emergency medical training is being made available to a wider audience through 𝐂𝐿𝐿's online courses. Go to 𝐂𝐿𝐿𝐼cademy.com and use promo code CCFR30 to get 30% off. That's 𝐂𝐿𝐿𝐼cademy.com. And thank you so much to our great friends over at Vortex Canada. They continue to support the CCFR podcast and the CCFR. Can't say enough about them. Check out all their great products at vortexcanada.net. That's vortexcanada.net. Vortex, the force of optics. Need a new boomstick? Bullseye North is Canada's shooting superstore and a proud supporter of the CCFR. With a wide selection of guns and top trending gear for any shooter, they have what you need. Plus, free shipping over $250, which includes ammo, or flat rate shipping of $17 under $250. Some conditions apply. Subscribe to their weekly newsletter to get first access to the hottest deals. A huge thank you goes out to our great friends over at the Saskatchewan Rivers chapter of Safari Club International. They do a lot of great work over there, including supporting the CCFR and the CCFR Radio Podcast. Check out all their great work at saskriverssci.com. That's saskriverssci.com. All right, we're back, and we've got Tracy Wilson of the CCFR, I think, via Skype. Wilson!
Wilson! Wilson!
There it is. What's going on, Giltaca?
Not much. It's the first episode since the holidays. How were your holidays? Let's start with that.
Well, they were good. They were kind of quiet here, but we got to spend some time with the kids, and I used some of that time to move my podcast studio in and get out of my home office. So you guys don't have to look at my dining room anymore. What do you think?
Well, now you got kind of a bat cave motif happening.
Well, you guys have man caves. This is my lady lair. What do you think? I like it.
Very clever. Anyway, we got a lot of stuff to go through, so we're going to get right at it. Of course, the first thing, the biggest thing going on right now is you have Justin Trudeau has decided that he's going to he intends to resign, not so much resign, but I think the way for us to start it off is I have a clip, and then when we come back, we can kick this around a little bit. Anyway, check it out.
Dancing to Taylor Swift.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was in Toronto attending a Taylor Swift concert with his family.
I was in the mood. I was going on.
You're wearing your Swiftie bracelet.
I still have that.
How old are you? And we know that 40 years ago, your father famously took a walk in the snow when the Conservatives were up in the polls and decided it was time to give it up. It's snowing out there now.
When my father was my age, he still had a dozen years of prime ministering ahead of him.
Oh my God.
Yeah. 2 weeks later,
I intend to resign as party leader, as prime minister.
2 weeks later.
Later.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
I'm dying.
What a difference 2 weeks makes. And you know, it's so Justin Trudeau, just completely unserious. I left out a little part with on This Hour Has 22 Minutes. I left that little part in the front where he's still wearing his Taylor Swiftie bracelets that he got from all the underage girls at the concert.
Yeah. Well, the good news is the weather yesterday was snowing, but only a little bit. So he didn't actually take a walk in the snow, but he promised to do so at a later time or something. He quit, sort of.
Yeah. Well, the interesting part is I intend to resign.
Mm-hmm.
And then, you know, I think we're holding back a little bit in this conversation because there's the other part of it, right? So it's like, oh, great, he's resigned. But we're not getting an election and we're not getting a full resignation anyway. Here's the other thing that he announced in his press conference.
And the fact is, despite best efforts to work through it, Parliament has been paralyzed for months after what has been the longest session of a minority parliament in Canadian history. That's why this morning, I advised the Governor-General that we need a new session of Parliament. She has granted this request, and the House will now be prorogued until March 24th.
And the 2 prorogations in 2 years, the first to avoid a vote of non-confidence that would have surely brought this government down. The second to avoid difficult questions. Anyone who disagrees with this government gets pushed aside. The challenge becomes that he gets to use every tribune he can use. All the media, all the voices, all the attention, and gets to further marginalize people who disagree with him. That's why we're talking about prorogation today.
So there's not going to be an election. He's going to prorogue Parliament for like basically 3 months while the Liberal Party gets their act together.
Yeah, well, and I know I was reading in there the Constitution of the Liberal Party, and it's saying that candidates who are interested in seeking the leadership have to report that 90 days before the leadership race. But I'm not even sure we've got 90 days. So I don't know. There's a bunch of questions that are still in the air about this. The Prime Minister just did a cabinet shuffle after the House rose, gave everybody a bunch of raises and promotions and, you know, a bunch more taxpayer dollars, and then prorogued. So now they're getting paid their cabinet minister salaries to sit at home. So, yeah, I don't know. Weird times.
Well, it's just more looting. These people are just looting the government, knowing full well they're on their way out. It's like, just how can I get an extra 40 grand this year of government money on the way out the door? And of course, you'll see that I put at the end of that clip, you know, it's okay when Justin Trudeau prorogues just to save himself so they can, you know, strut around as if he's the Prime Minister of Canada for another 3 or 4 or 5 months. And then give all his friends more money. But if Harper did it back in 2010, you know, and the other thing, by the way, I don't want it to be lost on anyone. Harper prorogued twice, and Justin Trudeau accuses him of proroguing rather than to answer difficult questions. And of course, he's not proroguing because, you know, we need a reset in Parliament so we're more productive. It's Parliament has gone on this long and it's deadlocked because they refuse to turn over documents in the Green Slush Fund scandal.
That's right.
Yeah, that's the reason why Parliament is paralyzed right now, because they're hiding documents that are associated with somewhere around $200 to $400 million awarded by Liberal insiders that were put on the board of the Green Slush Fund that they awarded to their own companies in funding. Like, it's astounding.
It is. And I know there was a committee that was supposed to study the issue of confidence in the government on January 7th. So it's interesting that he chose the day before that to prorogue, because he cannot prorogue if there's a question of confidence on the table. I would argue the question of confidence has been on the table for a long time. And that's what he's actually avoiding, right? Because we would immediately be going to an election in that case. But yeah, it's wild. People have a lot of questions about what does this mean? What's going to happen while we're sitting in limbo? You know, the country's got to continue and stuff's got to happen. And yeah, we need some answers on that.
Yeah, and actually, I was talking to a friend of mine last night, and you know, as soon as this happened, you know, and you probably experienced the same thing. You're looking at his resignation, the prorogation, the leadership race, the Liberal leadership race to follow, all that stuff from our perspective, because that's what we're preoccupied with. Yes. But overall, and obviously I don't want to get too far into regular politics, but overall, like this is really something. This is quite remarkable. So Justin Trudeau, to save his own skin, is proroguing Parliament when Donald Trump is actually taking office on January the 20th, who has threatened 25% tariffs, which would bring the Canadian economy to its knees should he do it. You know, and then of course, you know, the government's like, well, you know, they need us too. It's like, well, they could probably make it a lot longer than we could. So he would rather leave the government of Canada without a leader and without a functioning government, while Trump walks in and is like, the lights are on and there's nobody home. You know, they obviously don't take what I say seriously. You know what? Maybe I'll fix them. You know, they're playing political games to save their own skin and to award all this money to all their friends, even after everything we've been through with the Liberals. They cannot help themselves but dip their hand in the cash register. And they can't stop themselves from doing it for some reason. They can't do anything for Canadians. They have to do it for themselves. But during this crisis, and plus you got Trump has, at first it was trolling, like, do you want to be part of the United States? Look at all these benefits. And now he's kept up with it. It's almost like he's trying to sell an idea. Actually, Scott Carpenter, the president of the CCFR, said, it sounds to me like he's trying to sell an idea. And there's nobody home.
Yeah. Well, and you'll remember a couple of weeks ago when they had the fall economic statement, and of course that was right around the time that Chrystia Freeland resigned and quit. Well, she was getting fired or whatever. But within there was a promise of $1.3 billion for the border bill. And this was to strengthen the border in order to sort of pacify some of Trump's concerns. You know, we've long known that a lot of illegal weapons or illicit weapons come across the border into Canada, but there's a lot of really bad things that come from Canada across the border into the United States as well. Drugs, human smuggling, a bunch of bad stuff.
Terrorism.
Right? Terrorism. Oh yeah. We got all kinds of terrorism. We got, you know, organized crimes out of control, right? We got all this crazy stuff going on. So in order to pacify him, and I think preemptively, to have something to negotiate with when you go into those negotiations about the tariffs, they'd put the funding for the border bill in the following economic statement. But of course, that requires legislation. Well, when you prorogue Parliament, all that legislation on the table goes straight into the garbage. So here we are 2 weeks before the incoming president in the United States, who's complained about our weak borders, and he's not wrong. And they said, okay, fine, we're going to spend $1.3 billion on the border and reinforce it. And now they're like, just kidding, that's in the garbage now. You don't even have that to go into the negotiations with. So I think we're in a really, really weak position here.
Yeah, it's absolutely terrible. And, even if you look at it from best case scenario, maybe there's an election in 4 months. The election will be a month and a half. Mm-hmm. So that's 6.5 or 5.5 months. Maybe there'll be a new government. They're going to need a month or two to get organized. Then on top of that, they're going to have to create legislation to assign more money to the border again, or to reorganize it, or whatever the Conservatives decide they're going to do. And then that's going to take a year. So the Americans are sitting there going like, now it's going to be a year and a half until you do something about your border. You know what? We'll slap you with those tariffs and we'll see if that motivates you a little bit. See if that puts a little spring in your step. I don't know.
And for what? For Trudeau just to cling on a little bit longer,
so he can fly around the jet.
He's a year late doing this. He should have done this a year ago.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, we could look backwards all we want, but we're stuck with this. The problem is, I think it goes, the problem with it goes far deeper than the average person is realizing. It's not just an inconvenience. This could put us at a severe disadvantage when you're at a negotiating table with somebody like him, right?
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Anyway, we're a laughing stock of the world.
Yeah.
Like we are full on Banana Republic clown world here.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, not much has changed in the last whatever 6-7 years with Trudeau as the prime minister. Anyway, so what's the important part about all of this to our audience, to gun owners? The big question is, does the prorogation stop the government from filing orders in council?
No, that's the bad news. Is they, no legislation can be debated, no committees can work, all of that stops. However, they are fully able, and it's within their power to drop OICs. And I would almost venture to say that they would probably be a little more aggressive, because I think they know they're on the very final circle of that flush. They're going down.
Yeah. Well, one thing that's important to remember too is they can file OICs, but they do not have enough time to pass legislation. They know that. So if they file any more OICs, it's just out of spite. It's just just to drag, gun owners around by the hair through the mud puddle full of broken glass. They're just like, you know what? You guys will never vote for us anyway. We're just going to try to make your life more frustrating and more difficult. But anyway, they promised a couple of new OICs, if you remember, a magazine ban and also a new list of newly prohibited firearms in February. We'll see if they do that. But
even if they do,
it's not going to mean anything.
No, it means absolutely nothing, because we know they don't have time to carry this out. They absolutely don't have time now. And so I think it would just be slapping more OICs to punch gun owners in the face. And then, of course, to try and use that later politically to beat up a Poilievre conservative government. So, whatever. I mean, I wouldn't even take it seriously at this point.
Yeah. So, and as we may have said before, even if they come out with another gun ban, like I hate to say it early, but we're going to win this. Even if they came out with another OIC, it's just an inconvenience. It's just frustrating. Well, now you can't take your guns out until whatever, August or October or November at the latest, right? So it's they're out of time. Plus, they just lost 2.5 months for this prorogation. Plus, they lost time because the leadership race is probably going to take 4 months. And we ran the clock out on them. So that's the good news, I guess.
Yeah, well, and all of that, typically when, it doesn't really matter who they install as their new leader, they're going to lose the election either way. And typically when a leader steps in and then loses the election, they're kicked out anyways for another leader. So I don't know who would want the job of being the temporary sacrificial lamb getting thrown under the bus, but I guess we're going to find out.
Well, we had actually planned to talk about a couple of other things, but speaking of people getting thrown under the bus, our old friend Marco Mendicino, one of the most notable and very serious ministers of public safety in Canadian history, has decided he's not going to run again.
Yeah. I'm sure it's one of those want to spend more time with my family conversations. But looking at the polling, Marco is polling to 99% chance of losing his riding. The Conservatives are going to flip that with a 52% Conservative vote. So, he's not going to win anyways. I think he sees that. I know he sees that. The writing is on the wall, and he's jumping ship before it sinks. So, typical Marco.
Yeah, well, and of course, his story is, it's like, it's just too toxic. Same thing with Pam Damoff, right? She's going to lose as well. No, I'm leaving because, politics is so toxic. In fact, I don't know if I mentioned it before, but I saw this. I forget, it might have been Brandon, our social media manager might have sent it to me, but it was a CBC documentary Fifth Estate or the Nation.
Oh, yeah.
Right, where it's like, oh, politics has become so dangerous and so toxic. And, it's Marco's like, a guy came up and he was swearing at me and I get all these hateful emails and everything. It's like, and they didn't, like, they never ever really in this show interviewed anyone that could articulate why. Like, there's probably a reason why if you're getting that much hate.
Like, they have no idea.
Right. And so they did, and sorry to everybody if I've talked about this already, because I feel like I had, but they interviewed some guy on the street that was protesting, like, not for anything specific, on Parliament Hill. And he's like, oh, well, what are you so mad about? And he couldn't articulate himself. It's like, okay. And that was the only other side of the story. And then, of course, when Marco announces that he's not going to run again, you have all of the liberal, cult members come out and they're like, oh, it's just such a shame that politics is so, it's like, I'll tell you why it's toxic. Because this guy lied so many times, you couldn't even count them all. A great example is when he said that the long gun registry led to the arrest and the stopping of
the Polytechnique shooter.
Of Mark Lepine. And then, of course, Dan from Caliber Magazine was on the phone. He actually got media availability there. And he's like, this guy killed himself at the scene. And then Marco's like, and then switches to, look at all these brave victims. I'm just like, man, you just, like, these people say the most outrageous lies. They don't, like a normal person would have went, you know what? I got that wrong. I apologize. Sorry, I was thinking of something else. I mixed those two things up. But the long gun registry is good for these other reasons. Like, just an honest, normal person. But no, it's like gaslighting, right?
Oh, yeah.
And then, of course, he's like, he's talking to David Lametti. Maybe we can use tanks. Does the military have any tanks we can use against Canadian citizens? If you start
roll
looking
over
at
some
the list,
protesters.
it goes on and on and on. Like, he's an absolutely horrible person who has really hurt people. Mm-hmm. And, and it's just such a shock why he's getting all this hate. Same thing with Pam Damoff.
Oh, yeah. Well, and then the other liberal cult members are all, tweeting at them like they're war heroes. Thank you for your service or something. And it's just, wow. Yeah.
Same thing with JT,
we're not on the same planet.
Yeah. They're like, oh, you've done so much for the country. It's like, man, where have you been for the last 9.5 years?
Right.
Like, people have F Trudeau signs. What, for no reason? Because his hair is too beautiful? Like, why do you think that is?
They have no idea.
It's just the whole conversation is so unserious. But anyway, I think we beat that to death. But yeah, good riddance. Marco Mendicino, you'll go down in history as one of the worst, most malevolent, malignant people that ever held public office. Same thing with Bill Blair and the rest of them. So
yes,
they seem to put the worst people in the public safety file for some reason.
Of course they do. Of course they do. It's a dirty job.
Well, yeah, they have to do a lot of lying and sell their souls. So they're like, okay, what horrible person do we have here that we can throw in there and throw under the bus? In fact, if you remember, how many public safety ministers have we had? We had Goodale.
We
had Blair.
Bill Blair, Marco Mendicino.
LeBlanc.
Dominic LeBlanc. And now, who's the Ottawa MP that we've got now?
So 5.
5.
Wow.
5. Yeah, we've been through 5. And you know what? And that's how you know they don't treat this file seriously. Like, public safety is an actual serious issue in this country. Rising crime and violence, the whole shebang. I could rattle off a whole bunch of stats. But they don't take it seriously because all it's used for is pacifying anti-gun lobbies. That's it. That's what the file's about. It's not actually about saving lives or protecting Canadians. So
it's just a file to manipulate and gaslight people with.
Yeah.
Anyway, all right. So we'll move on to, you attended a municipal bylaw meeting, I think, in Ajax for our great friends, Firearms Outlet Canada, Fred Pellegrino, yesterday.
Yeah, so Fred, I call him Fearless Fred because he's looking at expanding his facility. He's got a great store in Ajax now. And he's actually been working on this for years, and there's been a bunch of different problems happening aside from the political problems. I mean, you've got a lot of gun shops and businesses that have closed because of the constant attacks by this government. Well, not only is he not closing, he's expanding. And I don't know. I don't have it written down, but I think I heard yesterday in this meeting that it was like an $8 million investment. Like this is crazy. So it's going to be this massive facility. It's going to have indoor shooting ranges. It's going to have a store. It's going to have warehouse. It's going to have, shooting ranges like inside normal lane ranges, but then it's also going to have indoor skeet, which that blows my mind on itself. And it's also going to have a massive, 5-star Italian restaurant. So I'm super excited about that. And just a whole bunch of amenities. So this will be it'll be like a plaza. And of course, getting the city of Ajax to agree to the plan, has been difficult. It's been a couple of years of battle, but he's redone it. He's found a new property. There's going to be a lot of construction that needs to happen to get this going. And it's a huge investment, a huge project. And we went there yesterday. It was the opportunity for people to speak, and he had some consultants and city planners that he had working on it. They spoke. I got up and spoke on some stats about, why it's a great idea for this facility for the people of Ajax. And at the end of it, they voted, and he won, I believe, 6-1 was the vote. So it was approved. So watch for some news on that. But yeah, it was a long drive, a 4-hour drive each way to speak for 4 minutes. But I think it was well worth it to hear all about it and to hear the other people speak. And then, of course, to get that win in the end. So totally worth it. I'm really proud of him. And talk about fearless at such a weird political time for gun shops. And he's like, hey, let's expand and build this big facility. I'm like, wow, okay. Yeah.
Yeah, pretty cool.
Awesome.
Well, I think one of the best parts of the story is you had a city councilor that had shown up, who had already decided he or she was going to vote against it, but then had their mind changed because of what was said in the room.
Yeah, they spoke at the very end, and this was all on camera. And he was very honest, and he said, "Look, I'm not really into this kind of thing. I don't really like guns. I know the local member of parliament had also written in opposition to this project. That's our friend Mark Holland, and a city councilor was like, you know what? I had some concerns, and I didn't know. You think about guns, and is this going to be safe, and what's this going to be like?" But he also went in with an open mind and just listened to the data that was put before him, listened to some of the questions, and Fred had all the answers. Fred's people had all the answers. It was just a really good information session. And he sort of, allayed all those fears. And the guy was like, you know what? I can't find a single reason why I would vote against this. I was wrong, and I'm going to vote for it. And man, talk about being a big guy to be able to admit that, right? Some of us get a little bit entrenched in our beliefs. And I'd like to think sometimes on that side of the fence more so. But yeah, he was like, yeah, no, this is a wonderful idea, and this is going to be great for Ajax. And boom, approved. So
that's pretty awesome. I was just chatting with Fred, as you know, just before we started recording, and he was amazed at that U-turn. Yeah. And I said, well, that's the power of an honest, mature conversation about a very poorly understood topic. And when we started the CCFR, that was the whole thing. It's like, we need to bring this out instead of being hiding in the closet as a community and as a segment of Canadians. We have to come out and we have to have this discussion, because that keeps getting used against us. The fact that people don't know what the laws are. They don't know, how big our community is. They don't know why people own guns. They don't know what's at stake. They don't know any of these things. And so it can only benefit us to draw that conversation out into the mainstream, which is not intuitive. And so yesterday was a perfect example of how, if you have someone that is intellectually honest, right, there's a few people still kicking around out there that are, they'll be like, I had a preconceived notion that was inaccurate. And so I'll change my mind. And in fact, let me just share. So the final meeting that you went to yesterday was part of this process, but the meeting before, Fred had asked me to dial into it. And honestly, this is kind of like insider information. I had no idea what I would have been able to contribute there. I was like, I'll show up. And if somebody asks, me, like, I don't live in the municipality. I don't, you know what I mean? I'm not an employee of Fred's business. Like I'm a nobody basically in that conversation. But I'm like, I'm going to show up anyway. And I did. And I had we didn't plan to talk about this, but it's actually kind of interesting. And so anyway, I'm sitting in there. It was a Zoom meeting. I don't know, it was 30 people, 40 people or something in there. And I'm listening to this conversation go round and around, feeding on itself and feeding on misinformation. Like, oh, there's going to be all these guns in the parking lot. And, we have enough gun crime as it is in Ajax. And I was just like, and I had, you can put your hand up in Zoom. And I'm like, I just want to address a couple of things. My name's Rod, blah, 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 blah. And so I had been jotting down all this ridiculousness. And I'm like, okay. And I was calm. And I said, well, here's the thing. The people that are in possession of firearms are licensed individuals. Here's a little bit of information about the licensing system, including a daily background check for as long as that person holds a license, all this. And I, and talked about how ranges work and talked about crime statistics. I did all that. And then one of the ladies that was opposing it said, you know what? I wish that Rod would have spoken first and then we could have saved all this time. And I think the lady that was running the meeting on behalf of the municipality said we should have had Rod running this meeting. I think that's what she said, something to that effect. Yeah. So, and I was like, and I didn't feel like I was doing anything special, to be honest with you. I was just like, this is the stuff I talk about every day. But we kind of forget about the effect that calm, fact-based conversation, and even when there's an exchange that would normally get our blood pressure up, if you just stay calm, be like, okay, well, that's not accurate, and here's why. And so much can be accomplished by that. And you did that yourself yesterday. So, that's how it's done.
Well, and it just feels good because I feel like, we've been at this, you and I, with the CCFR for almost 10 years now. And I feel like, I've been a gun owner a really long time. And we sort of had that idea where we just, lurk around quietly in the shadows. And that we did the wrong thing. And I think this is the right thing, is just to be open about it. And the people at that meeting were not gun people. They admitted it. And they had a lot of questions. And they were valid questions. Like, you can't get mad at them if they don't know the topic. That's, then that's what we're there for.
Yeah.
And it was just really nice to see them really absorb that information and then just make a rational decision based on that and let go of their preconceived ideas. And that's, man, it feels like things are really tilting. It's good.
Well, I would add, and I know we've been kind of on this for a little while, but I would add that this is one of the reasons why the Conservatives can start moving towards an election and not be afraid to talk about legal firearm ownership.
Yeah.
If this was 7 years ago, or 6 years ago, I believe that, in the last election cycle, actually in 2021, it was a problem because, they weren't prepared for that conversation.
Yeah.
And we've had how many years of this conversation being pulled into the public domain where we've been able to get the message out, being able to kick this stuff back and forth at some reasonable level where people are starting to be more educated and they're not believing the BS anymore. Mm-hmm. Certainly not the people that are undecided that got both sides of the story. So that's why we're here. That's what we're doing.
Yeah. And you see the big difference because in the 2021 election cycle, there was a decent leader, but he had a difficult time being strong and on his convictions, right?
Yeah.
And any pressure from outside or the public, like, I don't know if I want to, overturn bans or not overturn bans. Like, it was very wishy-washy, right? But now it's like we've got a leader of the Conservative Party, where I'm like, maybe don't talk about guns so much. He's like, I'm going to talk about guns and I'm going to overturn the bans and I'm going to focus on crime and sentencing and tough on crime and all this stuff. And he's polling at ridiculous, he's 27 points ahead right now. Like, that message, he hasn't changed it at all. It's been the same message actually his entire career. And he's not shying away from it. and yet he's polling to win. So I think that, it's sort of nice to see that the topic of guns and gun ownership, legal gun ownership, being sort of de-weaponized. Like it's not going to work this time, Liberals.
Yeah.
So,
and then by extension, people even asked me on Twitter, on X, even again yesterday, do you really think Poilievre's going to do this? It's like, yeah, well, two things. I don't have any choice but to believe that they're going to do it because we've invested a lot of time into that relationship. And they are the only party that understands fact versus fiction, that's running, right? That's capable of winning. But the other thing is, there's no political advantage for Pierre Poilievre, and many of you have heard this already. There's no political advantage for him to go back on his word. He will only bleed support because he's talked about it for years. Ever since he became leader, he's talked about it very openly about removing all of the bans and attacking crime and criminal behavior. And so he's been completely upfront, and he's still riding at supermajority, close to supermajority polling. So he'll only lose support if he doesn't do what he promised. I mean, he could be in danger of being a one-term government if he did. So there's nothing in it politically for him if he doesn't do what he says, and there's some political risk if he doesn't do it. So
yeah, absolutely.
I mean, can anything happen? Of course, right? We don't control the Conservative Party, but I'm quite confident, and I think we're going to be okay.
Well, and that's our job as gun owners, aside from being, the CCFR, just as gun owners, that's your everyday job, is to get out there, and every conversation that you're having on this topic with somebody, make sure that you're giving that person the information, and that sort of supports those leaders to be able to make those decisions with less political risk, right? So, yeah. Yeah,
and we could go on all day about your opportunities to make a difference, like at National Range Day, taking some people that have never shot before, go to a range that's having an open house on National Range Day, stuff like that, and having just honest, open, fact-based conversations about this stuff. It makes a real difference.
It does. It works.
Yeah. All right. I think we completed our list. It's 30 minutes, but I have to save a little bit of time for the president of the CCFR, Scott Carpenter from International Shooting Supplies. I'm going to have him on next. So I appreciate the update, Ms. Wilson, and we will see you next time.
All right. We'll see you then.
All right, we're back. So in the studio, we have Scott Carpenter from International Shooting Supplies in Surrey, British Columbia, but also currently the president of the CCFR. How's it going, Scott?
Great, Rod. Thanks. How are you?
I'm doing great. It's an interesting day, is it not?
It's been a very interesting day so far.
Absolutely. Well, the reason why I wanted to bring you on, we've had to re-record this interview because times have changed from literally a few days ago. But I did want to bring you on to discuss in real terms, in real life terms, how these bans and all this increasing regulation, all this tomfoolery that the Liberals, the NDP, and the Bloc have been at, how it's affected your business and by extension your family. So take a stab at that.
Well, it's been a bit of a weird journey. So, I mean, the way that they've structured this is they've been introducing new bans every, I don't even know what the time frame's been. It seems like every 6 months or so there's a new ban of some kind coming down. And so what that's done is intermittently tied up our inventory. So it starts with a percentage of your inventory, then a greater percentage, and eventually it just kind of grinds you down until you're sitting on so much stock that you can't sell, that your cash flow is completely squashed. And, whether this was done intentionally or just as a result of poor planning is really difficult to say, but the results are the same. And the result is it's become increasingly difficult to manage a business when you can't turn your stock over, because the cardinal retail or sin of any retail business is to not turn your stock. If it's just sitting there collecting dust, it's not doing you any good. And if you can't sell it and you can't replace it, you can't put cash back in the bank to buy different inventory either. So it puts you in a pretty tough spot. It's a lot of stress on us personally. It's certainly not been good for the industry as a whole. I know there's been a lot of businesses that have either suffered or ended up closing their doors as a result of this. I've seen it around in the southern portion of British Columbia quite a bit over the last few years. And by the grace of God, we're still here and still functioning, but it's getting difficult. So I won't lie. Yeah.
Well, you know, interestingly enough, when I do, I've done a collection of media appearances, especially during the last ban. And I don't know, probably half of the journalists have said, well, you know, the government is buying these guns back. And my response was always, that was 5 years ago.
Yeah.
It's when they said, you know, like, we're not going to let you take the brunt of it. Yeah. You know, this is about public safety. We're gonna buy those guns back at the earliest convenience. That was 5 years ago.
Yeah, that's a hollow promise. So there's been no financial relief for anyone in the industry at this point. And there's some businesses out there I know that are teetering on the edge right now because of the cash flow issue. And at this point now, especially with what happened today, the odds of anyone seeing any financial reimbursement for their tied up inventory is about zero. So, I mean, the good news is that we're getting closer and closer to an election and hopefully some sanity restored to our industry. So if people can hold on a little bit longer, hopefully they'll be able to, you know, pull that inventory out of the warehouse, dust it off and get it sold and get their cash flow back. So, I mean, the scary part is that if this goes on for much longer, the industry as a whole just get crippled. And if the industry's crippled, then the culture gets crippled as well, because the culture doesn't exist without the industry to feed it. So hopefully we'll get a spring election. We'll see if that materializes or not.
Well, I think one of the other reasons why I want to talk a little bit more in depth about this is people hear about, oh, you know, the industry or the stores are suffering, but what does that really mean? Like, what has this done? You know, you're just an independent business person.
Yeah, I mean, we're most of us are small family businesses, medium size. Some of us employ, you know, a half a dozen to 20, 30 people in our businesses. So that means layoffs, because as your cash flow decreases and your expenses essentially increase, right? Because you still have the same square footage that you got to pay for. You have to let people go. You know, you might have to cut benefits, that kind of stuff, just to stay afloat. I mean, in our household, the benefits thing has been a really important thing because I have a child with a very rare metabolic disorder, and we'd set up a benefits program when we first opened the business 15 years ago to help take care of her. And my wife, who's a public servant at the time, her benefits program didn't cover the medications we needed. So all that kind of stuff becomes very rocky for family businesses, especially when it's a business that's designed not just to make money, but to take care of people. So it's been a really stressful time for a lot of people, and I think most of us will be really glad to see it come to an end sooner than later.
Well, I remember when this latest ban happened, we were talking on the phone and you said, this is really starting to hurt. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's, you know, you walk back into your warehouse every day and you try not to look at the growing pile of inventory that you can't sell, and just try to do your best with what you have and to turn things over that you have, to try and generate more cash flow to keep buying inventory that you're allowed to sell. And as that pile grows, that task becomes more and more daunting. And as anyone in the industry will tell you, it needs to come to an end pretty soon.
And this nonstop, you know, contraction of what is available for you to sell based on the whim of Dominic LeBlanc or Justin Trudeau or
it's whoever. Brutal. I mean, we just never know what day we're going to wake up and find that, you know, another 10 or 20% of our inventory is now useless to us.
Yeah.
You know, there's no consistency. And the worst part is that it's not just the financial end of it. There's a legal aspect to it too, because a lot of the times they don't even tell you what they're banning. It's if it wasn't for people like 𝐟𝐼𝐴 and whatnot, scouring the FRT and telling us what's been banned, some of us wouldn't even know, you know. So, you know, there's legal implications, there's financial implications. It creates it creates a ton of stress. And like I said, I'd just be glad to have it over so that we can be treated fairly again.
Well, that's the good news, right? We had a non-resignation from Justin Trudeau.
Yeah, the non-resignation.
Yeah. This is sort of like a resignation, but not really. Yeah. And now apparently a leadership race.
Yeah.
Parliament is prorogued. We just talked about that with Tracy Wilson.
Yep.
And, you know.
Now 𝐥𝐞𝐿 announced that he will vote non-confidence in the spring, but we'll see. Yeah. Maybe. We'll see.
I think he's broken a promise or two. Like basically everything he's ever said.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Pretty much. But we'll see.
Yeah.
See what the end of March brings.
Yeah, and if we end up with an election, then this whole thing starts turning around. Which is,
and hopefully fast.
Yeah, I think it will be.
You know, I'm positive about the future. You know, like I think that there's better things for the whole country, not just our industry in the future. So I'm cautiously optimistic. We just need to get there.
Yeah. Well, that's part of that's the strategy in politics, is just to survive the bad times.
Yes.
And then get as much work as you possibly can in the good times. And that's what we're aiming for.
Our job is to outlast.
Yeah. And we will. We have. Right? It's almost over.
We're just about there.
Awesome. Well, thanks for coming on. I appreciate it.
No problem.
And we'll have you back soon.
Sounds good. Thanks, Rod.
All right, we are back, and I've only got a couple of things to go over with you before we wind up episode 180 of the CCFR Radio podcast. First thing I want to go over with you is this order in council that was filed, I think, on December 16th, right, last month. And it was billed by the Liberals as just cleaning up some redundant regulations. But of course, you can't believe anything these people say. They're pathological, congenital liars. Like, they can't even stop lying. These people lie for no reason, right? So unfortunately, they complain about, declining faith in institutions, right? When they behave like this, they are the source of that declining confidence. But anyway, so everything that they do, you have to look at, try to think of it in 10 different ways. Like, how are they trying to hurt us by doing this? But despite their claim that this is some benign cleaning up of a regulation that is no longer applicable, there's a bit of conflict or some controversy within the community about what this regulation change does. And I can't claim to really know myself. I suspect. I'll tell you what my suspicion is in a second. But if you want kind of a deep dive on that, you can always go to Ian Runkle's channel. It's always a good source for legal information as it applies to firearms. And Soapbox Guns on YouTube. So just search for that, and you'll find this gentleman's channel. It's really good. Some really, really highly detailed deep dives on even our lawsuit. He's done a bunch of analysis there, but really, really good stuff. As far as this regulation is concerned, my take on it, and it's probably 60% chance I'm wrong, but anyway, the way that I look at it, just on the surface, is it looks a lot like it applies to two orders in council that were filed by the Conservatives back when they were trying to constrain the RCMP from arbitrarily doing two things: arbitrarily changing the classification of firearms, which is just horrible. They seem to think that that's no big deal, but it's just incredibly malevolent. And also, the RCMP had this habit, apparently, of an importer would come with a new gun. They say, here's a gun we want to import. We believe it's designed specifically to be non-restricted, let's say. This is just an example. And they give it to the firearms laboratory to do their inspection, their investigation on the firearm itself, and then for them to make a determination of what the classification is. So they'll measure the barrel officially. They'll look at the receiver. Did this come from a full auto? It was just altered full auto, converted full auto, as they call it. Any of these things is semi-automatic only, all of whatever. So they would classify these firearms. So let's say it's classified non-restricted, and then they would publish it in the firearms reference table. So just to do those things, and like a lot of these firearms, especially if they're uniquely built, they're not built from another, they're not a variant, as it were, of another firearm. This does not take long. This is not a big job. And what these guys were doing is they're like taking 1, 2, 3 years to classify a firearm. And that just, in the real world, like, they don't live in the real world, obviously, but in the real world of business and trying to make a living and trying to serve a market and all the rest of that stuff, that just doesn't work. So anyway, the Conservatives came and they said, all right, you know what, firearms program or firearms lab, you got 6 months. When someone submits a firearm for FRT, you get 6 months. If you fail to do it in 6 months, then it's non-restricted. So that was a requirement. I don't know if that's still in or not. I kind of lost track of that one. And then the other requirement was, once you've determined the classification of a firearm, you have 1 year to make any updates, right? They use this we've updated it from non-restricted to prohibited. Like, update? But anyway, sounds like a reclassification to me. But they only had a year to do that. And if they didn't make any changes within a year, and that's to provide certainty to people like me and you, and also business and everything else, right? I mean, if you're a gun owner, you know the effect that would have. If they don't make any changes or updates, as it were, for a year, then it stays like that forever. It seems like they're repealing that one. Why? Maybe because they want to reclassify, update a bunch of classifications. I don't know. But you can never take anything these people do at face value because they are horrible. They are just, man, I one day I want to make a video. It'll be 3 hours long of all the times that the government lied to us about guns. Like, it would be an encyclopedia. Like, I'm not even exaggerating. So anyway, that's sort of what I think is happening, although that's kind of contrary to some of the other assessments of what the deal is there. But I guess we'll see as time goes by. We are also hoping to get a verdict in CCFR versus Canada from the Federal Court of Appeal fairly soon. I would say between 1 and 2 months from now. We're getting there. It's been almost 5 years that we've been fighting this relentlessly. And no matter what happens, this case is going to change. It's going to create case precedent on the use of orders in council. And it's going to be a consequential case no matter what, but hopefully it'll go our way. I would just love it. It would be nice to have a win. We're gonna have some big wins coming up, but it would be nice to have a little one now, if you guys don't mind. Also, I want to mention I did that video. It was a little bit. It was a little bit of a stronger video than I normally make. That was right before Christmas, and I just expressed some of the things. I talked about Operation Pitchfork as well, and we ended up with some really nice donations and some really great messages and comments, even attached to donations. So I just want to say thanks so much to everyone for supporting the CCFR and letting us do this work, allowing us the honor of doing this work for you, because I still find this work exciting, especially when you see what's happening with Operation Pitchfork. Speaking of Operation Pitchfork, we had a meeting, I guess it was about a week ago Tuesday. And everyone was given every full-time employee in the CCFR was given their marching orders for Operation Pitchfork. So it is underway, and we are hoping to have this thing rolling out about the end of the first week of February. Now, luckily, because Parliament is prorogued, if we're off by a week or two, it's not so bad, but we want every minute that we can before the next election for Operation Pitchfork to have maximum effect. So anyway, look for some details on what's happening there somewhere around the end of this month, if not in the beginning of the first week of February. You'll hear a little bit more about it, at least the parts that aren't going to be covert, as it were. All right. Yeah, and I also want to thank a few people. We ended up getting, over the holidays, I think 600, including, and we just had a surge because of this new promo code that got put out, the old promo code, right? We ended up with 600 store orders, including one that was for $1,700 worth of stuff. So again, I know you guys probably tired of hearing me say it, but I can't thank you all enough for your support. It's just awesome. It's just awesome to be able to swing a big club at the government and at people that want to negatively impact our ability to legally own and use firearms. It's just such an honor. It's a real privilege. So thank you for that. And then speaking of thank yous, our friends over at the Wild Sheep Society of British Columbia are holding another fundraiser. I'll tell you more about that later, but I'll be going to their, I think it's called Salute to Conservation event in Penticton in February, Penticton, British Columbia. But these guys are running another fundraiser. Hopefully I guess they're hoping to raise a fair amount of money for the CCFR. And just a shout out to them as a group, for especially a hunters group, right? Really understanding that these gun bans will get to them eventually, and the time to fight is right now. So really appreciate all the help there. Last thing, I promise, that I wanted to chat with you about is the most important thing, which is Field Officer of the Month for December 2024, this is the first time that we've awarded Field Officer of the Month twice to the same person. This will be the second time for Greg Weiss. So Greg is the most incredible field officer in the history of field officers, and just contributes so much time and energy and focus and his own resources on helping the CCFR do things like, get to TACCOM and get all the stuff there and merch and all the rest of that stuff. And same thing for TSS and a variety of other events. Greg is just, and looking after our range officer certification program, Greg is just incredible. So thank you, Greg, for all of your help. Don't ever think that it goes unnoticed. And if you forgot, what do you get for being Field Officer of the Month? You get a 1 year's free subscription to CATF, Canadian Access to Firearms, donated every month by Donovan Dewis, the owner of CATF. So thank you, Donovan, for that. You get a $100 promo code. Again, those pesky promo codes. You get a $100 promo code for the CCFR online store. And then Donovan has been publishing pictures of Field Officer of the Month in CATF, and you get mentioned on the TV show, and you get mentioned on the podcast. So, man, that's it. The list is done. What a long episode. Thanks for hanging in there. Really appreciate it. And, it's going to be an exciting year, no matter what. And it might get, as we've said countless times, it might get a little bit worse before it gets better, but we've outlasted them. Okay. So they can throw a few more rocks at us. I don't even care. I just don't even care. They are out of time. They're not getting any of our guns, and we are going to turn this thing around at the end of this year. And it's going to be, so I like change. It's going to be exciting. So thanks so much, everyone. Share the podcast. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.
This is another episode of the CCFR Radio Podcast. Remember, if you don't stand up for your own ability to own and use firearms, who will? Join the CCFR or donate right now at www.firearmrights.ca.